leopard skin pillbox hat. We startled ourselves by arriving in Zaïre on a missionary flight, which had not been our original intention. All regular flights in and out of Kinshasa had been disrupted by an outbreak of vicious bickering between Zaïre and its ex-colonial masters, the Belgians, and only a series of nifty moves by Mark, telexing through the night from Godalming, had secured us his backdoor route into the country via Nairobi. We had come to find rhinoceroses, northern white rhinoceroses, of which there were about 22 left in Zaire and 8 in Czechoslovakia. The ones in Czechoslovakia are not in the wild, of course, and are only there because of the life's work of a fanatical Czech northern white rhinoceros collector earlier in this century. There is also a small number in San Diego Zoo, California. We had decided to go to rhino country by a roundabout route in order to see some other things on the way. The aircraft was a 16-seater, filled by the three of us, Mark, Chris Muir, our BBC sound engineer, and myself, and 13 missionaries. Or at least not 13 actual missionaries, but a mixture of missionaries, mission school teachers, and an elderly American couple who were merely very interested in mission work and wore straw hats from Miami, cameras and vacantly benign expressions which they bestowed on everyone indiscriminately, whether they wanted them or not. We had spent about 2 hours in the glaring sun creeping sleepily around the dilapidated customs and immigration offices in a remote corner of Nairobi's Wilson Airport, trying to spot which was to be our plane and who were to be our travelling companions. It's hard to identify a missionary from first principles, but there was clearly something odd going on, because the only place to sit was a small 3-seater bench shaded from the sun by the overhanging roof, and everybody was so busy giving up their places on it to everybody else that in the end it simply remained empty, and we all stood blinking and wilting in the burgeoning morning heat. After an hour of this, Chris muttered something Scottish under his breath, put down his equipment, lay down on the empty bench and went to sleep until the flight was ready. I wish I'd thought of it. I knew from many remarks he had made that Mark had a particular dislike of missionaries, whom he has encountered in the field many times in Africa and Asia, and he seemed to be particularly tense and taciturn as we made our way out across the hot tarmac and took our tiny, cramped seats. I then became rather tense myself as the plane started to taxi out to the runway, because the pre-flight talk from our pilot included a description of our route, an explanation of the safety features of the aircraft, and also a short prayer. I wasn't disturbed so much by the "O Lord, we thank thee for the blessing of this thy day," but "We commend our lives into thy hands, O Lord," is frankly not the sort of thing you want to hear from a pilot as his hand is reaching for the throttle. We hurtled down the runway with white knuckles, and as we climbed into the air, we passed a big old cigar-fat Dakota, finally coming into land, as if it had been delayed by bad weather over the Great Rift Valley for about 30 years. In contradiction of everything sensible we know about geography and geometry, the sky over Kenya is simply much bigger than it is anywhere else. As you are lifted up into it, the sense of limitless immensity spreading beneath you to infinitely distant horizons overwhelms you with excited dread. The atmosphere on board the plane, on the other hand, was so claustrophobically nice it made you want to spit. Everyone was nice, everyone smiled, everyone laughed that terribly benign fading away kind of laugh which sets your teeth on edge, and everyone, strangely enough, wore glasses. And not merely glasses, they nearly all had the same sort of glasses, with rims that were black at the top and transparent at the bottom, such as only English vicars, chemistry teachers and, well, missionaries wear. We sat and behaved ourselves. I find it very hard not to hum tunelessly when I'm trying to behave myself, and this caused, I think, a certain amount of annoyance in the missionary sitting next to me, which he signalled by doing that terribly benign, fading away kind of laugh at me, till I wanted to bite him. I certainly don't like the idea of missionaries. In fact, the whole business fills me with fear and alarm. I don't believe in God, or at least not in the one we've invented for ourselves in England to fulfil our peculiarly English needs, and certainly not in the ones they've invented in America, who supply their servants with toupees, television stations, and, most importantly, toll-free telephone numbers. I wish that people who did believe in such things would keep them to themselves and not export them to the developing world. I sat watching the Miami hats as they gazed out of the window at Africa. Between an immensity of land and an immensity of sky, they sat there, incomprehensible, smiling at a continent. I think Conrad said something similar about a boat. They smiled at Mount Kenya, beamed at Mount Kilimanjaro, and were winsomely benign at the whole of the great Rift Valley as it slid majestically past beneath us. They were even terribly pleased and happy about coming into land for a brief stop at Mwanza, Tanzania, which is more, as it turned out, than we were. The aircraft trundled to a halt outside a sort of bus shelter which served Mwanza as an airport, and we were told we had to disembark for half an hour and go and sit in the International Transit Lounge. This consisted of a large concrete shed with 2 fair-sized rooms in it, connected by a corridor. The building had a kind of bombed appearance to it. Some of the walls were badly crushed and had tangles of rusty iron spilling from their innards and through the elderly travel posters of Italy pasted over them. We moved in for half an hour, hefted our bags of camera equipment to the floor, and slumped over the battered plastic seats. I dug out a cigarette, and Mark dug out his Nikon F3 and MD4 motor drive to photograph me smoking it. There was little else to do. After a moment or two, a man in brown crimplene looked in at us, did not at all like the look of us, and asked us if we were transit passengers. We said we were. He shook his head with infinite weariness and told us that if we were transit passengers, then we were supposed to be in the other of the 2 rooms. We were obviously very crazy and stupid not to have realized this. He stayed there slumped against the door jamb, raising his eyebrows pointedly at us until we eventually gathered our gear together and dragged it off down the corridor to the other room. He watched us go past him, shaking his head in wonder and sorrow at the stupid futility of the human condition in general and ours in particular, and then closed the door behind us. The second room was identical to the first, identical in all respects other than one, which was that it had a hatchway let into one wall. A large, vacant-looking girl was leaning through it, with her elbows on the counter and her fists jammed up into her cheekbones. She was watching some flies crawling up the wall, not with any great interest, because they were not doing anything unexpected, but at least they were doing something. Behind her was a table stacked with biscuits, chocolate bars, cola, and a pot of coffee, and we headed straight towards us like a pack of stoats. Just before we reached it, however, we were suddenly headed off by a man in blue crimplene, who asked us what we thought we were doing in there. We explained that we were transit passengers on our way to Zaïre, and he looked at us as if we had completely taken leave of our senses. "Transit passengers," he said. "It is not allowed for transit passengers to be in here." He waved us magnificently away from the snack counter, made us pick up all our gear again, and herded us back through the door and away into the first room, where, a minute later, the man in the brown crimplene found us again. He looked at us. Slow incomprehension engulfed him, followed by sadness, anger, deep frustration, and a sense that the world had been created specifically to cause him vexation. He leant back against the wall, frowned, closed his eyes, and pinched the bridge of his nose. "You are in the wrong room," he said simply. "You are transit passengers. Please go to the other room." There is a wonderful calm that comes over you in such situations, particularly when there is a refreshment kiosk involved. We nodded, picked up our gear in a zen-like manner, and made our way back down the corridor to the second room. Here the man in blue crimplene accosted us once more, but we patiently explained to him that he could fuck off. We needed chocolate, we needed coffee, maybe even a reviving packet of biscuits, and what was more, we intended to have them. We outfaced him, dumped our bags on the ground, walked firmly up to the counter, and hit a major unforeseen snag. The girl wouldn't sell us anything. She seemed surprised that we even bothered to raise the subject. With her fists still jammed into her cheekbones, she shook her head slowly at us and continued to watch the flies on the wall. The problem, it gradually transpired after a conversation which flowed like gum from a tree, was this. She would only accept Tanzanian currency. She knew without needing to ask that we didn't have any, for the simple reason that no one ever did. This was an international transit lounge, and the airport had no currency exchange facilities. Therefore, no one who came in here could possibly have any Tanzanian currency, and therefore she couldn't serve them. After a few minutes of futile argument, we had to accept the flawless simplicity of her argument, and just sit out our time there, gloomily eyeing the coffee and chocolate bars, while our pockets bulged with useless dollars, sterling, French francs, and Kenyan shillings.